Here we are the next day. The sanding lacquer cured up nicely and I sanded it down, and now I'm putting on the gloss brushing lacquer foam brush. It just fits inside the can, so load it up, get off the excess and put it on. I like to put on a thin coat and I'll let it dry for maybe 15 to 30 minutes, and then put on another coat, then sand it down, then do another coat, another couple coats, sand it down, and then 2 more coats, and that should be enough. So 6 coats in total, sanding 3 times. A bit obsessive maybe, but definitely 6 coats is recommended. And sanding, they say you don't need to sand between coats, but I disagree. Now, it could also be that I'm using a foam brush versus a high quality bristle brush, but these brushes are like 50 cents a piece, and a good bristle brush is more like 20 bucks for one, and then if you want to keep reusing it because it's so expensive, you're going to have to clean it out with lacquer thinner and so on, and I'd rather just spend a few minutes sanding than having to clean that brush all the time. Alright, so now I got to move the camera, otherwise I'm going to slap lacquer all over it. Okay, my last coat of gloss lacquer has finally dried. Things are looking really good. Something else I should have mentioned is that good ventilation is a must. I've got a window here fan blowing out on high, and it's doing a really good job of clearing out any solvent fumes. Now the next step is to do something called rubbing out the finish. Inevitably some bits of crap will fall onto the finish while it's still wet, like there's a bit of dust here. Also, the gloss is a bit uneven. In other words, it's shinier in some areas than others, and there's also a few marks from the foam brush I used. Even if I had sprayed, there'd probably still be some issues with stuff falling on, uneven gloss, and maybe something called orange peel, which is something that can happen as a lacquer dries and it ends up looking like the surface of an orange. Also, when you rub out the finish, you can control the level of gloss. Another way you could do it is you can buy lacquer in satin and semi-gloss, but I really like to go with gloss these days. We're doing a little reading up on this, and the chemical composition of gloss is actually different than semi-gloss or satin. Gloss has something called, or at least high-quality gloss, has something called nitrocellulose in it, which makes the lacquer really tough. The satin and semi-gloss don't have it, and instead they have a flattening agent, and that's why there's a rattle ball inside there to break up that agent and get it uniform in the spray can. Whereas gloss doesn't even have a rattle, it just doesn't need it. So the next step will be to let this cure up a bit longer, and then use 400 grit sandpaper followed by quadruple zero steel wool. After using the steel wool, the surface will be at what looks like satin. And if that's what the finish you are looking for, you can just stop right there. I'll show you what that looks like when I resume recording. I finished setting the table with 400 grit sandpaper and rubbing it down with the steel wool. And if you wanted a satin finish, you could just slap on some wax and call it done at this point. If you wanted a semi-gloss, you would go through the next stage, which is to rub it using a felt block or cloth wrapped around a wood block, some mineral oil, and this pumice stone, which is what I'm going to do right now. I finished with the pumice stone and mineral oil and cleaned off all the residue with a clean rag, and now I'm at a nice semi-gloss finish. But I want to go one step further, so I'll be using the rotten stone and a felt block to try to give this more of a gloss finish. I finished buffing with the rotten stone, mineral oil, and cleaned off the residue, and now I've got a nice gloss finish. Final step, apply some paste wax to give it a little protection. And finally, here we are after a nice coat of wax and a bit of buffing. You could still use a little more buffing, but I think you get the idea. Now to recap, the whole point of this series was to show you that you can refinish an antique without having to take it down to the bare wood and then bring it back up with grain filling and staining and toning and so on. On the other hand, any defects that were still present are still here, like these dings. They are still somewhat visible, except that they're completely smooth because they're encapsulated now under a layer of lacquer and wax. But I kind of like that look. This is old, it's got a few dings, but now it looks a lot better, but it still has some character to it. The other reason I've been working on projects like this is a prelude to working on this, which I've got a few other videos on. It's a Philco 15DX I got about 2 years ago. I've done a lot of asking around and searching around, and as far as anybody knows, this is the only intact one known to exist. I heard a rumor that there's an empty cabin on the west coast, but I couldn't corroborate it. So I've been taking my time on working on this. In particular, I really do not want to refinish this. The top I had no choice, it's in my other videos. The front of the veneer was completely gone and the top was really damaged, so I'm working on that. Likewise, the base got flooded, all the veneer came off. This was nice burled walnut, but I'll be replacing that. But everything from the base right up to the top lip, I really don't want to have to strip. Partly because there's some marquetry in here, which is hundreds of little itty-bitty bits of wood that are inset and glued down. I'm a little bit afraid if I strip this, these little bits of wood might fall out. Also, I don't think stripping this carving out, or these fluid columns, would be a whole lot of fun. I've never stripped anything that intricate before. So what I plan on doing is taking these same techniques I just used, like on that coffee table, to repair damage like this and this. I started doing a little bit over the weekend, like up here and along here, and so far it's looking pretty good. Other than a bit of a color difference where it's a little bit lighter where it was damaged and darker where the old finish is still intact, I think it's working out pretty well. What we're going to do is put a few more coats of lacquer on and then use some Howard's Restore finish with walnut pigment in it and run over this a little bit and see if I can even out those color differences. But otherwise, I think this technique will work out okay, even on badly scratched areas like this. I will certainly keep you guys updated. I hope you found these videos interesting, and maybe you can refinish something too.